relaxing. It's peaceful.
Yeah, right?
Anyway. All right, how you doing today? My name is Vince. I'm Backyard Mangoes. I'm here with Alex,
Hello.
who everybody knows was Tropical Acres, and we're under this massive old tree. Tell us about the tree, Alex.
Well, this is probably the oldest tree on the property here. It is an old turpentine mango. I'm guessing this tree was probably planted or grew from a seed in the late 19th century, or maybe early 20th. I'm guessing end of the 1800s this tree probably sprouted, and was probably here when the Sturrocks bought the property in 1919. It was probably already here growing, and it survived a lot in the 20th century, a lot of hurricanes and events, and it still fruits to this day. And we use the fruit from this tree to produce a large amount of our rootstock.
That's what I was going to ask. Is this a big rootstock tree?
Very much so.
How many mangoes you get off this in a year?
Thousands. It's in the thousands.
Wow.
So we get a lot of rootstock off of this one tree. It's very important for us. So it's kind of neat to have a tree this old that's still playing such an important role.
Well, that's pretty neat. But so today, though, we have a pretty interesting topic, and this is Florida. And for everybody who loves mangoes, Florida is a mecca of mangoes. And I have Alex asked him a few days ago to think about why and how Florida has become such a mecca of mangoes. And we think about all the different fantastic varieties that we get here. You know, you talk about we have Indian varieties and Caribbean and Thai and Asian and Indo-Chinese, and of course our Florida varieties. And so Alex is going to give us just a brief rundown how Florida became such a mango mecca. And I have a couple questions probably throughout if we can get to them.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an interesting topic, isn't it? Florida has become very well known in the mango world, despite not occupying a very large part of the mango world, at least in terms of production. So when you think of the mango producing countries around the world, the major mango producing countries, whether that's Mexico, Brazil, Thailand, or obviously China, India is the biggest producer. These countries produce in the millions of tons of fruit per year annually. India alone produces in excess of 20 million tons of mangoes. So for some perspective, Florida maybe produces 30,000 tons. We're talking about like a micro fraction.
For commercial,
but also in general, most likely if we were to extrapolate it, because obviously people in Thailand and India have non-commercial mangoes just like we do, mangoes in their yards and personal properties and what have you. So in terms of like total volume of mango fruit and trees in the world, Florida is a tiny speck. So it's kind of remarkable that this tiny speck, if you will, has become such a major contributor to the mango world. And, so it leads to the question of how did that come about? And it was just kind of a circumstance of history, because mangoes are actually, well, Florida in general is like a newcomer to mangoes in terms of the rest of the world. Mangoes were not successfully introduced to Florida until the 1860s, when Dr. Fletcher introduced turpentine trees to the Miami area, and they spread from there. They were introduced to other parts of Florida in the 1860s and 70s. So
were they in the Caribbean already prior to that? So
yes, in fact, they were probably brought to Florida from Cuba, I believe is where Fletcher's seedlings came from. So, mangoes originated in the Indian subcontinent, modern Eastern India, Bangladesh, Burma is considered the area that they're indigenous to, and they made it to Southeast Asia not too long after. So they've been in that part of the world for thousands of years. They were brought to the African continent by traders a long time ago. They made it to the Western Hemisphere via European colonization in Central and South America as early as the 16th and 17th centuries, the Caribbean as well around the same time. So the introduction to Florida came much, much later than it came to most of the rest of the mango growing world. So what happened was we got the turpentine in the latter half of the 19th century, and there were some enterprising individuals who realized that Florida was a place that you could grow mangoes despite the limitations. And they knew about mangoes in other parts of the world, and they were friends with people who were horticulturalists in India or what was then French Indochina. And they began to introduce mangoes from those parts of the world. And we're talking about, when I say enterprising individuals, people like David Fairchild, Elbridge Gale, Edward Simmons, John Beach. These are horticulturalists that were in the business of...
I imagine at that time they would have to ship whole grafted trees because there was no
Yes.
FedExing scions
Right.
overnight.
And it was a long trip. So they sent a number of Indian mango trees from India to Florida in the 1880s.
That had to be a huge expense.
Yeah, and they
huge
sent them to
sort of...
they sent them to Washington D.C. before they sent them to Florida. Ironically enough, but they sent
in the winter.
Some of those trees were sent to what's now modern West Palm Beach. One of those was the Mulgoba mango, and from the Mulgoba came a hybrid with the turpentine that is called the Hayden, and of course that kind of sparked the Florida mango trade, if you will. But these individuals that were involved, some of them were private horticulturalists, some of them worked directly for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but they helped spur this initial introduction of mangoes from these different parts of the world. And not too long after that, we got hybrids between these, right? I mean, the Hayden was one of them, a hybrid between a mango that has its own complex history, the turpentine, which is a polyembryonic mango, and a monoembryonic mango from India, the Mulgoba. So we got these complex hybrids that had multiple points of ancestry. And that kind of made Florida a secondary center of diversity for the mango relatively quickly. And it's interesting because in these other countries, they had mangoes for so long, they weren't really making new introductions to India from Latin America or new introductions to Thailand from India and so forth. But that was occurring here in Florida. And as Florida's population began to increase and kind of boom from the 1920s onward with the construction of the railroads and things of that sort, there became kind of a mango frenzy in Florida in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And there was even a Florida Mango Forum that became kind of an engine for promoting the mango here. There was people that started nurseries and families that became very involved with mangoes, like the Zills and the Sturrocks, who kind of helped develop new varieties, promote varieties. The Mango Forum promoted all these varieties from people's yards, seedlings that got selected here in Florida. And kind of, I guess as a consequence of Florida's climate being not so optimal for mango for a few different reasons, mostly moisture, humidity, and rainfall, Florida mangoes got introduced to other places. And now Florida mangoes kind of dominate the commercial mango trade in the Western Hemisphere. Mangoes like Hayden, Kent, Kit, Palmer, Brooks, Irwin, and others have been introduced overseas and are now grown commercially in Latin America. They've formed the basis for some breeding programs in other countries. Many of the mangoes in Israel and South Africa are descended from Florida varieties. It's kind of amazing how adaptable they've proved.
So these breeding programs, and we talked briefly about this the other day, like Zill's breeding program are other countries, or are there other people in other countries doing such a breeding program so extensively, or prolonged, or because we think about all these new varieties that are continually coming out that get people excited to try and taste for, what's one of the more recent, watermelon splash or something. And but anyway, but are these same sort of development programs going on in Philippines, Thailand, India, or in other places?
Yes, there are hybridization programs or projects that either are actively occurring or have already occurred over the decades in other mango producing countries. In India, South Africa, Israel, Australia, and I'm leaving out other places. But yes, they have had active breeding programs in other places. Now, the goal of those breeding programs is often very different from the mango breeding that has been done in Florida.
How's that?
Well, for one thing, they're usually geared towards producing better commercial varieties rather than varieties for home growers. And so consequently, flavor may not appear very high on the list of traits that are trying to be bred.
Yeah.
It matters, of course.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking for all breeding programs here, but for example, the Israeli breeding program focused on things like color and shelf life and productivity. So they used two Florida varieties in their initial breeding programs, Irwin and Palmer, which, while beautiful mangoes, are not amongst our best tasting varieties to offer. But they produce such beautiful hybrids. So these Israeli mangoes are some of the most beautiful varieties we happen to grow, in fact. And so the same could be said for some of these other breeding programs where they're trying to come up with varieties for their local growers to grow on a mass scale and profit off of. And they're trying to uplift themselves economically by doing so. The programs that were done here in Florida, particularly the most recent one with Gary Zill, focus more on trying to achieve a better tasting mango, more interesting tasting mango. The other traits matter too.
Yeah.
Okay, so productivity, disease resistance, shelf life, physiological traits are all important. But with the Zill hybridization program, it was what, in Gary's mind, what can I make that's like really incredible, really awesome, that's going to blow people away? So that appeals to those of us who really love mangoes and want to grow them in our yards and what have you, more than a program that's trying to breed something that has uniform shape and color and is going to appeal to somebody at a supermarket, right? So that's the main distinction I would make between either the breeding programs in Florida or just the selection of mangoes in Florida. But as it happened, we selected varieties like Hayden and Kent and Kit all these decades ago, Tommy Atkins, which has come to dominate the mango trade in the Western Hemisphere. And these were Florida selections that got brought somewhere else and just did well everywhere they were brought. Florida mangoes seem to do well everywhere, and it's because if they can fruit in this climate, which oftentimes is too humid, too wet, or winters can be too warm. Our soil is sometimes substandard depending on what part of Florida you're in. If a mango can do well in the long term in Florida, it will probably do well everywhere else. And so Florida mangoes have done well throughout the world. And that same thing cannot be said when we take Indian mangoes or Pakistani mangoes to Florida, or a mango from Mexico to Florida. It doesn't always thrive in our conditions here. So anyway, that tradition that was started by these early mango enthusiasts in the late 19th, early 20th century kind of continued. And now, more recently, we had the project of Gary Zill and the efforts of Richard Campbell, who also has played a big role in the introduction of new varieties to Florida and the selection of new varieties in Florida and their promotion. And so to this day, Florida has been kind of this engine for new varieties, exciting varieties that have flavors that people all over the world wouldn't historically associate with mangoes, like citrus and coconut. We have mangoes with names like coconut cream, pina colada, orange sherbet, exciting stuff. So it's really great that that Florida has been able to have this contribution to the world of mangoes and continues to be a part of it.
So if you were going to replace Tommy in the store, what mango would you like to see more, say, commercially available to replace Tommy's in the store?
Well, that's not a high hurdle to clear, right? So Tommy Atkins, and I can't disparage the Tommy Atkins too much because it's been a very successful variety, and one that's grown locally and not picked too green and not receiving chilling injury is okay. It's mediocre on the scale of what we grow now, but like it's not the terrible experience that so many people encounter when they eat one at the grocery store.
Well, especially
But
if you've lived in Ohio and that's all you're exposed
yeah,
to.
I would
right?
probably, you know, I would. It would be so tempting to just go with something very marginally better than the Tommy, but performs just as well or whatever. And I think there's a temptation on the part of many importers to do such a thing. And there's been trials by some of these importers in Latin America to grow things like Mahashanak or Namdak Mai. There's lots of plantings of Namdak Mai in Mexico now, for example. Ataulfo obviously is not a mango that we're unfamiliar with. That's now grown way beyond Mexico. They grow it in parts of South America that they didn't grow it previously because it's superior to the imported Tommies and Kents. But what would I do if it were me? Well, I would probably, I'd throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. Because there's a lot that goes into growing a mango for export, right? That goes beyond just production, disease resistance. Can it survive hot water treatment or irradiation? What kind of shelf life does it really have? And how does it pack and all these other factors? But probably what I would do is I'd say, okay, let's make a list of stuff that does taste more than marginally better than the Kents and the Kits and the Tommies or whatever. You could score them, and say, okay, this gives us a body of mangoes that we can work with to start with. Okay, now let's take that body that is above that flavor threshold that's really going to impress people and see how many of them produce well enough, are disease resistant enough. Let's eliminate color, even though it matters, unfortunately. But let's take that out of the equation because Ataulfo is just a yellow mango, right? If they can sell Ataulfos, why can't we sell, why can't we sell Edwards and Sweet Tarts and you know what I mean? So but then score the other traits as well, and then you whittle it down to maybe a group of varieties that are worthy of large-scale trial, and see if you can give the American consumer and the Western consumer in general something that's not just marginally better, but a lot better than what they're used to eating and what they think a mango tastes like. That's my thought on that.
Yeah, I always explain it this way when people are asking about my mangoes or mangoes that they look at and they kind of like, that seems a little pricey, or say, well, you've had a hamburger at McDonald's and you've had a hamburger down at your local bar that you paid $10-15 for, and that is exactly the difference what you're getting with a much better grown and handled mango. It was picked and the way it was handled, the way it was grown, even the variety, where the meat, if you will, came from. But that's the quick answer on it. But
yeah,
anyway,
I think
easy.
It's
they then can connect the dots.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that so much of the world, especially the tropical world, knows what a good mango tastes like, but such a small percentage, comparatively speaking, of Americans and Westerners and Europeans do know what a good mango tastes like. It's a very small percentage that have gotten to eat just a tree ripened Hayden or something like that, and been able to compare that to a grocery store mango. And I wish there was a way for us as mango enthusiasts and growers and producers to introduce more Americans to good quality mangoes.
Yeah.
Not just, let's forget the crazy stuff for a moment and just something that's not chilling damaged and picked too green, and but just something that's like a good quality product. So if that were the case, that more Americans knew what a good mango tastes like, uh, it would be hard for us as people that grow and sell mangoes to keep up with the demand for them. So
Yeah. The problem is here the land has become so valuable for developers that it's hard.
that's true. Although we are seeing a pretty major uptick in the acreage of mango being planted in Florida, and because we have very warm winters or mild winters now, it has increased the geographic area that mangoes can be grown on some kind of commercial level here. So there is more opportunity.
We need to pick a day where the winds go in the other direction so the airplanes fly west.
Never happens.
Rarely.
Yeah.
Rarely.
They either go this way or that way.
Yeah. Anyway, but the back to the mango mecca idea here. So Florida is, and I think partly is, you have immigration with that, and for so many years we've had different cultures coming to Florida.
Yep.
And so when they're coming, you come from one of the Caribbean islands, it's close by. It's easy to bring whether a seed or a seedling or a plant, and different things. So people, and then they realize these things grow here. And so then they start cross pollinating and new stuff come up, whether it's been on purpose. I mean, there's a few varieties that are found, if you will, in somebody's yard that it may have been there a long time. Like a neighbor of mine down the street, he has a mango. It's a pretty good mango. It's Glen-like. And it's he's like, yeah, I planted it from a seed 30 years ago and it popped up and it's a decent mango.
Yeah, I think that that's something that's definitely worth touching on, is the contribution of all the various ethnic groups we have here in Florida. Florida is an extremely diverse state, ethnically speaking, and these people that come from places where mangoes are already endemic, they're enthusiastic about mangoes, and they bring their enthusiasm with them, and they help contribute to the mango culture that we have here in Florida, the special mango culture that's kind of this melting pot of the rest of the mango growing world. So that's really awesome, and one of the things that we have very ready access to grafted mango trees here in Florida. It's a luxury that we probably take for granted a little bit, because in some parts of the world, grafted mangoes are harder to come by, and people are kind of left to growing seedlings. Farms plant grafted trees, obviously, but planting grafted trees in your backyard isn't necessarily always an option. And here in Florida, it's not that difficult to obtain them, and so more people have access to specific varieties and cultivars of mangoes here in Florida than they do perhaps in a remote village in southern India or in the Philippines or something like that. So it's definitely to our benefit that we have all this amazing access to all these different kinds of mangoes here to kind of keep churning the wheel.
I know, when my wife's from Philippines, so when we go to Philippines, that's basically the only mango I see there, Philippine mango, and it's good, But I know I've actually talked to a couple people recently and other growers there who are growing some different mangoes there. I don't know how commercially they're doing it or more for nursery or private, but yeah, like you would think a place like that you would have a diversity of mangoes, and there's a couple slight diversification, but it's not like you would think you'd see a lot of different mangoes in the market, and you don't.
Yes, I get that from people that go to some of these other countries, and they want to try the mangoes, and they're expecting a much larger diversity of varieties than they actually encounter. Now, in India, I would say there's a number of mango enthusiasts in India that have amassed very large collections, and they have, being kind of the birthplace of the mango, they have pretty strong varietal selection in India, probably in Pakistan as well. Um, but yeah, people can also become very attached to sort of their native mangoes. And here in Florida, kind of, you get people, actually old Floridians, that are very attached to old Florida varieties,
Yeah.
similarly. But I would say there's so many newcomers to this state. People are moving here all the time, and there's probably much less a level of localized attachment to varieties here than there is in a lot of other countries and locales. So that also kind of helps promote mango diversity here as well.
I know. Well, my wife, that Philippine mango is a mango, and she likes other mangoes as long as they're very mangoey. But a couple years ago, I forget if it was a lemon zest or a meringue, but I know it was a lemon something, and she bit it, and she was just like, "Oh no, that's not mango. Like that didn't." She's like, "I don't like that," and I was like, "Yeah, because it did not have that for her, that home flavor or enough of a mango flavor to it that just." But you're right, and I have another friend who he grew up in Miami. He's in about 80, and for him, his favorite is a Tommy Atkins because that's his comfort food, if you will, and
Yeah,
you grew up knowing it, and that's home for him, and yeah, it's anyway. But we all have that.
sure.
Anyway, well, thank you for your time. It was hopefully everybody stayed till the end and look for us to start. What do you think of the mango prediction this year? Well, season. I know it's a early still, and
Yeah,
lots can happen.
we'll have
But
a few spring mangoes, but nothing probably that we'll be able to sell on any scale. I would imagine that at some point in April we'll have enough fruit to be at least selling by appointment, and I would expect our main crop to start, either in late April or May, based on the bloom that we're seeing now.
you think bigger, smaller than last season overall production?
Well, here it wouldn't surprise me if it's pretty similar to last year.
Okay.
But we're in a pretty good spot here. State overall, probably, maybe a little less volume than last year, but last year was a pretty exceptional year for most of the state. I think we're still going to have a good mango season in Florida this year, barring like a freezing event occurring at some point in February. I think we'll end up with a pretty good bloom. I've talked about how there's more people that have planted mango trees, so the volume of fruit in total should be pretty good, even though it may not be quite at the height of last year. So I'm expecting, at least here in Southeast Florida, a pretty good mango season. So, and it might start a little earlier than last year. That's always hard to pinpoint. Certainly, we'll be selling mangoes before May here, and we'll have a lot of fruit in May and June. So,
Sounds good.
mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yep, no problem.
Oh, I forgot to turn it on.
Really?
No.
I mean, I would.